Hey guys, Raven Knight here. So, today I'm taking a look at a video from Film Theory. Some of you may remember that I've responded to them before. Once was to MatPat's video on why the Avatar cycle was bad and should be removed, and the other was from their new host who said Oogway was an awful mentor and downright toxic. Now, I think in both videos I was pretty much right in my conclusions, but I admit that in my Oogway video at least, I got a little overly harsh in my criticisms and I ended up apologizing for that. But that does not mean that they are immune from further criticisms. No. In this recent video we're looking at, Film Theory is proposing the question of whether or not Iroh from the Avatar franchise is guilty of war crimes. Now, I watched the full video and, to their credit, the host actually does a good job for the most part. He does lay out the things that are necessary to be constituting of a war crime and points out how Iroh does not meet them. So I was about to say that he did a great job and that there was no need to respond to this video. He had everything about right. Up until the end. Now, I'm not going to bore you by watching the whole video just to get to the one bad point, so we're just going to skip ahead to the final part of the video where he fumbles the conclusion in a catastrophic way. Honestly, in most cases, if someone just got one thing wrong, I'd kind of overlook it, but this was pretty bad. This was actually a really bad conclusion to come to, and it misses a lot of points. So let's not waste any time and take a look. Let's change up my avatar, first of all. Changing up my avatar to avatar. Never mind. There we go. Now we're going to skip to the very end when Film Theory concludes, rightly, that Iroh is not a war criminal. And he comes to this conclusion by holding up Iroh's known actions to the actual criteria of what constitutes a war crime in today's society. Now, I want to start by saying, I would argue it's very silly to use our world's laws and judicial practices to judge a character from a fictional world with its own rules and processes. I think that's silly, but whatever. Let's hear where things go wrong.
All in all, based on everything we see from Iroh and his time as a general and the siege he led against Ba Sing Se, there just isn't enough evidence to say that the Dragon of the West is a war criminal.
Correct. This is absolutely correct. Dead stop in the video.
But that doesn't mean that Iroh is off the hook. You see, war crimes aren't the only crimes regulated by international criminal law. They also police stuff like crimes against humanity, mass unaliving, and crimes of aggression, all of which are different things apparently. People are just great. So, no, he's not a war criminal, but the awful, horrible crime that Iroh would really be worried about here are crimes of aggression. See, a crime of aggression is also known as a crime against peace, and it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. The planning, initiation, or execution of an act of war using state military force on a large scale. Basically, it's starting a war or battle for no real reason.
Okay, so this is where Film Theory really fumbles, because that is not quite the right definition of crime of aggression. Defined by the International Criminal Court, quote, the planning, preparation, initiation, or execution by a person in a position effectively to exercise control over or to direct the political or military action of a state of an act of aggression which, by its character, gravity, and scale, constitutes a manifest violation of the Charter of the United Nations. So, first of all, let's take a look at that second half where it says it manifests a violation of the Charter of the United Nations. Already we have a problem. The United Nations do not exist in Avatar: The Last Airbender. That's not a thing. So already this shouldn't even be relevant, but let's ignore that part. Let's take a look at the beginning portion. The planning, preparation, initiation, or execution by a person in a position effectively to exercise control over or to direct the political or military action of a state. So stop there. This is a key component about the crime of aggression. It has to be done by a person who is in control of a state military or the state military. And now you would think that Iroh, being a general, could count here because, he's a general and he has command of a lot of soldiers. So, that fits. But consider something here. It was not Iroh or his father that started the war against the world. It was Sozin, Iroh's grandfather. Sozin launched the war on the world and the Fire Nation and has been engaged in this war for 100 years. It could be argued, of course, that later Azulon and Ozai both would plan barbaric and criminal acts during the war as well, But as Film Theory pointed out in his video, we have no evidence that Iroh helped in this planning or concocting, and that fails to meet one of the two criteria for any criminal case. In criminal cases like this, you need to meet the mens rea and the actus reus. Actus reus is guilty action, or the actor performing a crime. Mens rea is a guilty mind, or the conscious choice or desire to commit a crime. So, for example, it's not enough for me to say, I really want to rob this bank. I actually have to act on it too. Both need to be met, because you need to have the conscious desire to do the crime and then do the crime. In order for one to be found guilty of a crime, both must be present, the desire and choice along with the action. So even if Iroh engaged in a criminal act under the orders of Azulon, his father, it does not necessarily mean he understood the orders he undertook to be criminal, nor did he have the personal desire to see a crime enacted. I'm curious to see if you will bring forward proof of this, because up until now, you haven't brought forth any proof that Iroh had any intention of hurting people, of trying to start a war unnecessarily, because as far as he was concerned, because all we're talking about here is the siege of Ba Sing Se, that's all we've been focused on. We're not focused on any other military action that he took, but the siege of Ba Sing Se would be under the constitution of a siege of a criminal piece of, not a criminal, sorry, a foreign piece of land or an enemy checkpoint. Trying to take the capital of an enemy's base of operations or a capital of a city would totally fall into the purview of war action, not war of aggression. So let's keep going.
In the real world, these were mostly put in place as a way to charge the German leadership at the end of World War II.
All right, you bring up the Nuremberg military tribunals. It should be noted that during these tribunals that you were referring to, 4 of the criteria for aggression were stated. They were laid out pretty clearly here. 1, a state act of aggression. 2, sufficient authority to satisfy the leadership requirement. 3, participating in the planning, preparing, initiating, or waging of the aggressive act, and the mens rea. We've already established that we cannot prove Iroh had the mens rea. We also can say that Iroh did not meet the authority to satisfy leadership requirements, as he was not the one who was leading the nation, only a general leading a portion of the armed forces, because it should be noted that in many of the Nuremberg tribunals, not all the generals were convicted. There were a few generals that were brought up on charges, and some were convicted, but that was because of their high rank and because of their actions taken and knowledge that they knew was going on. Not all generals in the Nazi Party were brought up on charges or even convicted. Nor were there any generals charged in the war responsibility trials in Finland. Merely being a general is not enough to meet the authority criteria. So you can't say, he was a general, so he has to be brought up. No, not being a general isn't enough. He has to have sufficient authority to satisfy the leadership requirements. You have to have the mens rea. He lacked both of these. So 2 of the 4 criteria were not met. I'm just going to throw that out there. Let's keep going.
And the International Court came to the conclusion that crimes of aggression were the worst sort of international crime because they were the domino that often led to the other horrors of war. We also know for a fact that crimes of aggression exist in the Avatar canon. In the Legend of Korra spin-off comics, Kuvira is explicitly charged for starting multiple wars of aggression. So in the end, it doesn't matter how honorable Iroh is or how ethically he led his troops. As the crown prince of the Fire Nation, next in line to the throne and the person leading the siege of Ba Sing Se, Iroh would absolutely be guilty of these crimes of aggression. And the worst part of it all for Iroh? He can't even say that he's being punished for the sins of his ancestors. He actively wanted to continue the fighting and admits as much across the whole franchise. In Legacy of the Fire Nation, he explains that he once had ambitions of being Iroh, the Fire Lord, Scourge of the Fire Nation. While in the show itself, he says,
"When I was a boy, I had a vision that I would one day take Ba Sing Se."
Okay, so once again, I will remind you that merely being a general and leading a siege does not constitute a crime against peace, especially when you consider the humane treatment he showed his adversaries and the honor he showed in the war. It is very unlikely he would be brought up on such charges post-war. In fact, we'll come back to that point, but let's keep going. Let's move on to this next bit. You say he wanted to continue the fighting and point to him seeing himself as the Scourge of the Fire Nation. Yes, he was the crown prince and dreamed of becoming a great fire lord like his father and grandfather. But do you remember the 2 criteria of a crime? Mens rea, actus reus. Even if you consider his desire to be a great fire lord and continue the war to be mens rea, the guilty mind, you still lack the actus reus, the guilty act. He did not become fire lord and he did not continue the war. In fact, he left his position in the military. He abandoned it. He stopped fighting. He learned. He went off on his journey of enlightenment. The dude did not continue what he was planning. He did not continue what he wanted to do. And he even said, when I was younger, I thought this, but that does not mean that's what he did. Then you point to his quote about how he envisioned himself capturing the city of Ba Sing Se when he was a boy. Well, yeah. What's that prove? That he dreamed of winning a great war when he was little? When you're a child, you have dreams of being a hero. You have dreams of being someone special and important. And when you're a child living in a war-torn nation, the heroes you dream to be are the ones who win battles for your country. It makes sense that Iroh would see himself winning a great victory for the Fire Nation. It doesn't make him guilty of anything. Are you saying that the siege itself was a crime against peace? No, the act of aggression is the initial start of the war by Sozin and his staff. Azulon and Ozai were certainly guilty of their own crimes, and Azula, well, she was unquestionably guilty of a lot of things. But Iroh, as you yourself acknowledge in this video, we lack evidence to support it. Your foundation is faulty at best.
He wanted to continue this war earlier in his life for his own glory. So no, Iroh isn't a war criminal, but that doesn't mean he isn't guilty of international crimes against peace. You're gonna need to serve a lot of tea for free in Ba Sing Se to make up for this one, Iroh. But hey, that's just a theory. A film theory. And cut.
Okay, guys, so we're done. We finished. Let's wrap this up. First, is Uncle Iroh guilty of war crimes? No. And to Film Theory's credit, if you watch their full video, which I do recommend, they do a great job of breaking down what constitutes a war crime and why Iroh doesn't meet any of those specifications. So it's a good video. Definitely check that out. It's this ending portion that baffles me. For all their talk about going to the evidence and making sure that we meet all the criteria, this felt very rushed, felt very last minute, and I don't know why they added it. A crime of aggression is a very complicated aspect of a time period within our own history that I don't know why they had tried to apply to Iroh. It makes little sense, and they didn't do a good job of making it make sense. It was very quick. I don't know. I didn't get why they did this, but let's play that game. 3 points I want to make. First of all, you would have a very hard time finding a court willing to try Iroh on these charges. Because post-war, you have to look back at what Iroh did near the end of the war. He not only left the high command of the Fire Nation, he was no longer a general, he actually helped save the Water Tribe from the Fire Nation that was attacking it under the command of Admiral Zhao by stopping him from killing the Moon Spirit and reviving it when it had been killed. He went on the run from the Fire Nation, so he was considered a fugitive, and then he joined the White Lotus in retaking Ba Sing Se from the Fire Nation. His actions near the end of the war would have been considered heroic by most of the other nations. I think they wouldn't want to bring him up on charges. I think they'd go, yeah, man, you helped us out so much, we consider you a hero now. We'll just say let bygones be bygones at this point. So you'd have a hard time finding any court in any of the lands willing to bring him up on charges. Second, even if you could find someone willing to bring him up on charges, it would be a political nightmare to do so because Zuko is the Fire Lord, his nephew, who loves Iroh like a father. Yes, that's a great way to start this. You finally have peace. You've made peace with the Fire Nation. Now let the Fire Lord know you're going to be charging his uncle with crimes. Yeah, that's a great idea, bro. You go for that scamp. See how that works out for you. Not a good move. But even if we leave all that aside, let's say that you really did bring him up on charges, you really put this boy in court and had Phoenix Wright defending him, it still wouldn't stick. Because he meets very few of the criteria for it to be considered a crime. He does not have the means res or the actus reus, because especially the actus reus, because he didn't act on anything. And if you want to say, but he sieged Ba Sing Se, the siege of a city does not an act of aggression make. In order for you to be guilty of an act of aggression, you need to instigate a conflict or war using the supreme power of the state in a military sense. He was a general under the command of the Fire Lord. He went to Ba Sing Se because it was a major enemy outpost, the capital of the Earth Kingdom, which was their opposing force, and was trying to take it. And even when trying to take it, he did not use any dishonorable, cruel, or cold tactics. Apparently, from what we understand, he was honorable, respected, and he did not do anything out of the ordinary for what would constitute a war. No one would want to bring him up on charges, and as far as we're concerned, there was no instigation of action. And yes, you could say, but when he was young, he wanted to conquer, he wanted to keep the war going. That just means he had the means rea and not the actus reus. He did not act on it. Just because you have a desire to commit a crime, even if you want to call it a crime, I wouldn't even call it a crime to want to fight for your nation, but even if you wanted to call it a crime, he didn't act on it. If you had a little boy in today's society who said, I want to fight for my country and die for my country, and I dream of one day conquering all the world for America, I mean, are you going to say, well, you're guilty of a crime there, little buddy. You're guilty of an act of aggression. No, he's a kid who dreams of one day doing something awesome for his country. It's what kids do. And Iroh said he thought this when he was a boy. And even when he did attack Ba Sing Se, he did it in the context of him being a general trying to do something great for his country. I'll be real honest, Film Theory, this was a bad conclusion to come to. This was a really bad conclusion, which stinks because the rest of your video was really good. But this last part floundered and failed. You really fumbled the ball here. I expected better, but hey, you know what? That's just me. That's my thoughts on the matter. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below, and I will see you in my next video. Take care.